I was pruning the roses in the garden when I heard a calm voice from the other side of the fence. "Those flowers can still come back." I looked up. The man who had moved into the house next door a few days earlier was watching me with a small smile. "I'm not talking about the flowers," he added. I frowned. "Then what are you talking about?" He held my gaze. He appeared to be around my age, perhaps a few years older, with silver hair cut close and a posture that suggested a long-practiced discipline. His eyes were a deep brown, the color of strong tea, and they carried a serenity that unsettled me immediately. I wasn't accustomed to being read that way, especially by a stranger on a Tuesday evening while I was wearing my old gardening clothes. "I'm talking about the soil," he explained, stepping a little closer to the wooden divider, "and about the person tending it. Sometimes we prune too much out of fear that the growth will get out of hand, but life has its own stubbornness, don't you think?" I didn't respond right away. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my leather glove, feeling the weight of the pruning shears in my right hand. As a federal circuit court judge, I spent my days listening to cheap metaphors from attorneys trying to move my courtroom. I was trained to separate fact from fiction, law from drama. "My roses are perfectly fine, Mr. Min-jun," he said, inclining his head slightly in a gesture of courtesy that seemed to belong to another era. "And your roses are magnificent, Your Honor, but they look a little lonely." Before I could formulate a sharp response about how solitude was a deliberate and very well-managed choice, he turned with a quiet wave and walked toward his back door. I stood there, still, breathing in the smell of damp earth and the distant sound of traffic, while the silence of my own house suddenly felt heavier than usual. My life was a monument to order. At 58, I had reached the peak of my career. In the courthouse, I was the Honorable Judge Helen Calloway. My rulings were cited for their technical clarity and an almost surgical absence of sentimentalism. I dealt with human chaos, divorces, custody disputes, contentious estates, and my function was to place every piece in its proper legal position. When Robert died 5 years ago, my world threatened to come apart. We had shared 30 years of a solid marriage, built on mutual respect and a routine that ran like a Swiss watch. His death, a sudden heart attack while he was reading the Sunday paper, was the only thing in my life I could not sentence or organize. After the initial grief, which I lived through privately and silently, I made a decision. I would live alone. My children, Tyler and Beth, were grown with lives of their own. I had no interest in becoming the widow who finds a new hobby, or worse, a new husband. I had my cases, my books, my garden, and the peace of a house where nothing moved without my permission. I believed, with the conviction of someone who has witnessed every misery of the human heart in conciliation hearings, that love was a quota I had already exhausted, and I was at peace with that. Or at least, that's what I told myself every night as I turned off the bedside lamp at precisely 10:30. In the days that followed, I tried to ignore Min-jun's presence. It was difficult. He was a retired architect who spent a great deal of time outside, transforming the neglected yard of the neighboring house into something new. He didn't use loud machinery. He worked with his hands, pulling weeds and laying stones with a patience I found simultaneously fascinating and irritating. One morning, while I was drinking coffee on the back porch before leaving for the courthouse, I saw him struggling to raise a wooden trellis. He appeared to be having trouble with one of the joints. My instinct for problem-solving spoke louder than my resolve to keep my distance. "The angle is wrong," I called from the porch, holding my porcelain cup. He stopped, looked up, and smiled. That smile wasn't challenging. It was welcoming. Architects tend to be stubborn about angles, Helen, but I'll accept a recommendation from the bench. I walked down the steps and approached the fence. For a moment we stood there, separated only by the wood, discussing the physics of a jasmine trellis. I ended up coming through the side gate to help him hold the structure while he drove the screws. "Thank you," he said, wiping his hands when we finished. "By the way, The coffee on your porch smells like freshly ground beans, a luxury I appreciate. It's a habit. I like things done the right way. So do I, he agreed. But I've learned that sometimes the right way is simply the way that makes us feel less aware of what we've lost. Those words hit me like an unfavorable ruling. He knew. He was carrying the same weight. I learned that morning that Min-jun had lost his wife, Soon-hee, 4 years earlier. He had come from South Korea to the United States to be near his only daughter. But, like me, he valued his independence deeply. We stood in silence for a long time, watching the garden taking shape. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two survivors recognizing each other's uniform. Autumn arrived, turning the neighborhood trees to shades of copper and amber. My routine, once strictly solitary, began to gain new threads. The exchanges at the fence became daily. It started with gardening advice, moved through book recommendations, and eventually settled into cups of ginger tea that he prepared with an almost ritualistic delicacy. Min-jun was a natural observer. He noticed when I came home from the courthouse, with my shoulders tense after a day of difficult hearings. On those days, he didn't force conversation. He simply left a small package of rice crackers or a flower from his garden on top of the fence post. I found myself thinking about him during hearings. In the middle of arguments over the division of assets, my mind drifted to the image of Min-jun carving wood or tending his orchids. I felt an adolescent curiosity that embarrassed me. How old was he exactly? What did he think about grief? Did he also feel his wife's ghost in every corner of the new house? One afternoon, he invited me for a walk in the nearby park. I don't usually walk on weekdays, Min-jun. I have too many case files to review, I said, trying to maintain my facade of a very busy woman. The case files will be there tomorrow, Helen. Today's light won't be, he replied, with that infuriating and magnetic calm. I went, and I went again the following week. We walked slowly, discussing everything from the brutalist architecture of downtown to Buddhist philosophy. He told me about his life in Seoul, about how his work as an architect had consumed him for years, and how Sun-hee's death had made him realize he had designed many buildings but preserved very few lasting memories. I gave my life to my work, I confessed to him as we sat on a wooden bench. I believed that if I were the best judge, the best mother, the best wife, I would have control over everything. But life doesn't honor court orders. He laughed, a low, quiet sound. No, it doesn't. Life is a willful artist. The shift in my energy didn't go unnoticed by my children. Tyler and Beth came for the traditional Sunday lunch. I had made a pot roast, but decided to decorate the table with some of the flowers Min-jun had given me. New flowers, Mom? Beth asked, raising an eyebrow. Did the garden start producing, or do we have an admirer? It's just the neighbor, Beth. He's a kind man who likes gardening, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Tyler, however, was harder to redirect. The new neighbor, the Korean gentleman? I saw you two the other day when I stopped by to grab my phone charger. You both seemed pretty, close, talking at the fence. He's a friend, Tyler. Nothing more, I said, though I felt my face warm. Mom, just be careful, Tyler continued, with that protective tone adult children adopt when they think their parents are becoming vulnerable. You know how these things go. We miss Dad. We understand the loneliness. But we don't want anyone taking advantage of you. Taking advantage? I set my utensils down on the plate with a sharp click. Tyler, I have been a federal judge for 30 years. I adjudicate criminals, fraud cases, and corruption. Do you genuinely believe I can't discern the intentions of a man who plants jasmine? The rest of the lunch was tense. Their concern struck me at a tender point. Loyalty. In defending Min-jun, I felt as though I were diminishing the importance of Robert. That night, I couldn't sleep. I looked at Robert's portrait on the nightstand. His gentle eyes seemed to question me. Are you forgetting me, Helen? Are you replacing me with a calm voice and a new garden? The internal conflict became a courtroom inside me. On one side, the Helen who desired the company, the accidental brush of hands while exchanging a book, the intelligent conversation in the fading light. On the other, Robert's widow, the keeper of a 30-year story that could not be tainted. I began to pull back. I stopped going to the garden at our usual hours. I answered Minjun's messages with glacial politeness. "I'm tied up with a complex case," I lied. The truth was that I was terrified. Loving again felt like a posthumous betrayal. If I allowed Minjun into my life, I would have to admit that Robert wasn't the one and only the first. And for a woman who prized integrity above everything, that felt like a failure of character. Minjun noticed the withdrawal. He didn't insist, didn't call repeatedly, didn't knock on my door. He simply respected, and that respect hurt more than any insistence would have. One evening, a summer storm descended on the city. The wind howled through the window frames and the power went out, leaving my house in complete darkness. I lit some candles and sat in the living room, listening to the rain. The silence, which had once been my sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum. I heard knocking at the back door. Minjun. He was holding a flashlight and an umbrella, and he was completely soaked. "Helen, I saw your lights go out. I thought you might need, well, anything." I let him in. He refused to sit on the upholstered furniture in his wet clothes, so we stayed in the kitchen, in the trembling candlelight. The air was charged with electricity, and not all of it was from the storm. "Why did you pull away, Helen?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "I didn't pull away. I'm a busy woman, Minjun." "Don't use your position with me. I know the look of someone trying to hide behind a stone wall. What frightens you so much? Me, or what you feel when you're with me?" The tears I had been holding back with such discipline finally overflowed. "I loved Robert with every fiber of my being, Minjun. He was the father of my children. He was my home. If I let you in, it feels like I'm saying he was just a chapter. I feel like I'm betraying his memory." Minjun set the flashlight on the table. He stepped closer, not to embrace me, but to be near enough that I could feel his presence. "I understand," he said. "I feel the same about Sunhee. Sometimes, when I laugh at something you say, I feel a pang of guilt, as if I'm laughing too loudly at her funeral." He paused, searching for the words. "But Helen, love is not a finite resource. It isn't like money in a bank account that you spend on one person and have less left for another. Love is like light. You can light 1,000 candles from a single flame, and the first flame burns no less brightly because of it." He took my hand. His hands were warm and rough, the opposite of Robert's soft hands, and it was there, in that contrast, that I understood. "I don't want Robert's place," he continued. "That place is sacred, and it belongs to him. I want my own place, a new place, built on who you are now at 58, not on who you were at 25. You aren't replacing anything. You are expanding." For the first time in 5 years, I allowed myself to be held. Minjun put his arms around me, and I cried against his chest for everything I had lost and for everything I was afraid to gain. That night, by candlelight and the sound of the rain fading to a whisper, I finally delivered the most difficult ruling of my career. I declared myself not guilty of wanting to live, not guilty of wanting to love again. The climax wasn't a cinematic kiss, though there was a kiss, soft and tasting of ginger tea. The real turning point was the moment I looked at Robert's photograph and felt no urge to hide it. I realized he wouldn't be saddened to see me smiling. He, who had known me better than anyone, would understand that my heart was vast enough to hold the treasure of our past and the promise of my future at the same time, without contradiction. Months later, Minjun's garden and mine had become nearly one. We decided to remove the fence that separated them, creating a wide, open space where orchids and roses grew side by side. My children came around. It wasn't immediate, but they saw that I wasn't losing my mind. On the contrary, I was more present, more alive. Tyler even began asking Min-jun for advice about home renovations, and Beth came to see him as a steady presence for conversations she couldn't always have with me. My professional life remained intense, but I no longer brought the courthouse to my pillow. I had someone with whom to share the weight of the day, someone who didn't need me to be the Honorable Judge Calloway every hour of every evening. Today, sitting on the porch beside Min-jun, I watch the sun go down. He holds my hand, and I feel the texture of his skin, the pulse of a life that continues insisting on blooming. The human heart is, truly, a work of extraordinary engineering. It is capable of carrying immense losses, deep scars, and a longing that never fully passes. But at the same time, it possesses an infinite elasticity. I learned that loving again does not erase those who have gone. It only gives new meaning to the journey of those who remain. The past is not an anchor holding us to the bottom. It is the keel that allows us to sail new waters without capsizing. The paper flowers he gave me that first autumn are still on my desk at the courthouse. They don't wilt. And, as Min-jun said on that very first day, the earth is never truly exhausted. It only waits, with the patience of centuries, for the right moment to surprise us with a new spring.